1. This story was shared to me by my father, and this happened when he was about 12 years old. My father grew up in a rural town somewhere in Southeast Asia, where houses, huts, are usually far away from each other and trees and bushes are abundant. Television and electronic toys are not yet well known in this province at that time, so he and his cousins usually just goof around to pass the time. One of the favorite places they like to frequent is this certain humongous mango tree that resides just roughly 2 or 3 kilometers away from my father's house. The mango tree is as tall as a 5-story building, has a big hollow trunk, and has leaves so thick sun rays rarely reach the soil it grows from. Beside the tree is a small bamboo hut. This hut is usually being used by farmers that want to cool down after a long day in the field. Surrounding the said tree are tall stalks of sugarcane, making the spot where the mango tree looks like a lone island, a little patch of earth and a vast green plantation. My father, his sister Anna, and cousins Timothy, Hank, and Patricia came to this mango tree one particular day. They want to play hide-and-seek, and the place provides some good hiding spots in such a small place, so they decided to play there before dawn. They started their game as soon as they arrived at the place. It's after lunch, so the sun is beaming hot, and it's a good time for some hide-and-seek. Laughter and shouts filled the air, and they lost track of time. My father's sister Anna asked for a time out to catch her breath after chasing one of their cousins. All 5 of them decided to take a break and take a rest inside the small bamboo hut. My father remembers that the sun is almost setting at this point. While Hank is taunting Anna for being slow, Timothy suddenly hushed them and told them to stop talking. My father asked him why, puzzled and curious on how his cousin acted. Timothy just put his index finger to his lips, signaling my father to keep quiet, and then Patricia complained of the foul smell. They can't tell where the smell came from, but it reeks the whole place in an instant. And that's where they heard the sound that my father can only describe as a loud gong. All of them silently crouch in one corner of the hut. They are enveloped in a fear they can't identify. Then another bang of gong, and then another, and another, until it became too loud that they have to cover their ears. Hank peeked through a small slit and quickly covers his mouth to stop himself from screaming. The remaining kids, ever so curious, scrambled to see what made Hank react that way. This is how my father describes what they saw on that afternoon. It was kind of like a parade of demons, he said, and it came out from the large hole of the mango tree beside the hut and goes through the tall sugar canes. The parade consists of red carabaos in front, hauling what look like carriages with big cauldrons. The carabaos have fiery eyes and noses, bellowing loudly while a tall, red, god-like creature whips its back. The said creature has long horns almost covering both of its ears. It has an abnormally long torso, bald head, and skinny arms. They can't fully see its face, for it walks past the hut, following the cauldron carriages and small red people. They all look like normal people, except they are as tall as 3 feet, skins are colored red, and eyes glowing. And all of them are wailing non-stop, louder and louder each time as the gong resounds. It's like if the wailing slowly subsides, a gong will be heard, and automatically they will all scream in unison. Just beside the small people are big red dogs that don't have any fur. They are bigger in size compared to the small red people, in which they are sometimes attacking or barking at. Sometimes one of the said red dogs ate a small red person. They all saw how it struggled to get out of its fangs, but the dog just shakes it violently like a toy. Imagine how dogs play with their toys. This made Patricia cry. Timothy quickly covers her eyes and hugged her tight. After the long line of small red people passed that my father thought would never end, follows 4 tall creatures, same as the one with the whip in front. But one of these creatures is not red, but white, and its face doesn't look like the others. This white creature is the one who's holding the gong and hitting it. The other red creatures are holding some kind of pole with a flag on it. I've asked my father what kind of flag, he can't remember it anymore. The parade passed the hut and gradually vanished, the sound of the gong, the smell, and the wailing, until they can't see or hear it anymore. Only darkness and cicadas. All returned to normal, but the group are still afraid to go out and return home. While Timothy and Hank are calming the girls, for they are both crying now. My father heard his father, my grandfather, call from outside. The sound of worry and anger can be heard from his voice. He scolds the kids for staying too late, for it's past 11 p.m. and they haven't returned home. The group told my grandfather what they witnessed. My grandfather quickly gathered the kids and hurried home. They all washed the kids before letting them inside the house, burned their clothes, and all of my relatives prayed until morning. They are never allowed to play in the big mango tree again. What really bothers my father to this day is how familiar the white figure looks. It has long hair and beard, similar to how we picture the Almighty One. 2. This happened a few hours ago. Note that someone named Susan died at our house before we moved in, which was about 10 years ago. She had died the year before we moved in. We've had a couple of strange experiences, but nothing particularly defined or intense, except for this. We live in the countryside, there isn't much around, and when we asked our neighbors if everyone in their house was still there over text, they said everything was fine and everyone was accounted for. I came out of my room to go to the kitchen, which is down a hallway that leads to the living room and the front door. My mum was sitting on the couch watching YouTube on the TV, so she could see the glass in the front door. This glass is about 1.2 meters off the ground, and has a pattern on it that kinda lets you see what's under the glass. But it's more obvious when something moves outside under the glass. It's impossible to hide behind the door, there's no blind spot. It also wasn't a branch hitting the window. The trees are so far away that if that was happening, I'd be more worried about the tornado than any paranormal activity. There was a loud knocking on the glass, maybe the door itself, 5 knocks long, evenly placed, about half a second in between each one. It was around how loud knocking with your full wrist and some of your arm is. It sounded extremely human. I don't think it could have been an animal. The strange part is, there was nobody there. My mum didn't see anyone in the doorway, nobody moved to the left, there's a window there, and there was nothing disturbed on the porch, nor in the plants in front of the porch to the right. We didn't open the door just in case someone was there, but I don't think there could have been anyone. I came to the door and looked outside through it. There was no movement. It was still light out from the sunset. We also did a check of all the windows to make sure they weren't broken or opened or showing signs of entry. We looked outside all the windows around the house and didn't see anybody there. Tomorrow, when day breaks, we're checking for footprints and other signs of human presence. I attempted to use an EMF sensor near the door, but since we'd taken so long to make sure there was nobody there, I didn't get any readings, if there were any. I only read the signal from the Wi-Fi router, so at least the sensor was working. Homemade with Arduino with hardware to make it highly sensitive. I cannot distinguish if the knocking came from inside or outside. It sounds the exact same. It was a very hard knock, almost like if someone used a ring to knock on the glass, or their knuckle to knock the door. Not hard enough to make the glass reverberate and sound echoed, but loud enough to be heard clearly from over 10 meters away, or through a nearby door. My cat was oddly calm. She didn't seem to notice anything weird, but she also didn't look out the front window like she usually does when something happens at the front door. She likes to watch people as they leave, and say hi to us when we come in. She was staying near the front door, as if someone had come in, but I can't say that it means much. It's just interesting to note. The last thing I want to say about this experience for the night is that the knocking sounded urgent, like someone needed help or had an important message but wasn't panicked. There were also no footsteps that I could hear from someone stepping on the concrete outside, and they were audible from inside. I've never felt threatened by anything that's happened. I've never felt like strange events were malicious. They've just always seemed like someone saying they're there. This was just a very strange event, a little bit freaky. But if I have to leave it up to anything, if there's no signs of human presence in the yard, then I think, or maybe hope, it was just Susan knocking. I'll take living with ghosts over having someone urgently knocking on my door at 9 at night for unknown reasons any day. Update. Upon inspection of the dirt outside, there are no clear footprints. One plant seemed eaten slightly, and there were large patches of depressed dirt. There are wild bunnies in our yard, and there are similar depressions near the same types of plant around the back of the house. I didn't see kicked up dirt, but it's hard to say for certain that nobody was there. Part of me says it's possible. The rest of me says we would have seen them in the window when the knocking happened. And we did check in one place they could have hidden. Behind a wall near a bush, and there wasn't any disturbed dirt back there. In fact, only one plant seemed to have been damaged, but it's so close to the porch, which is about 30 centimeters to 40 centimeters higher than the ground there, that if someone was trying to run from the door, they wouldn't have hit it at all. That same plant seems slightly eaten, which leads me to believe, maybe just because I don't like the idea of someone being there, that the disturbed dirt is from bunnies. The last thing that tells me this was probably, hopefully, Susan, is that this isn't the first time people have heard knocking. For a few nights my mom heard knocking in her room, and once she asked Susan to stop, she never heard knocking at night again. So to conclude, we didn't see anybody at the door when the knocking happened, or outside shortly after, within 1 second. The ground outside seems disturbed by bunnies, but it's hard to say if anything or anyone else disturbed it. And I have no idea what else it could have been other than Susan. This seems to be something I have to leave as unexplained. I can't debunk paranormal activity as the cause, nor can I confirm that no human was there. I do still believe that there wasn't anybody there, though. I'll be sure to have my EMF at the ready if anything else happens. Thank you for listening to this wild experience. 3. This happened a couple of years ago in Manchester, UK. I lived up in the north of this city in a town called Bury, and worked early hour and night shifts at the airport. I'll put the real place names on here for anyone who would like to Google the areas in question. Anyway, one early morning in winter around 2 a.m., I set off to work. Around this time there was an intermittent overnight roadworks on the motorway, which would send you off at a junction without warning, diverting you back onto the motorway further down. And this night was one of those, taking me off at Worsley and sending me down through Worsley, skirting near Eccles towards Manchester's large shopping mall, the Trafford Centre. I knew the area, having lived there a few years previously, but this time of night seemed unusually quiet and deserted on the roads. Normally I'd see the odd person drunkenly staggering down the street, or late-night taxis scurrying around. But tonight, nobody was on the streets at all. I drove down Barton Road, which to my left is followed by a dark canal which was mist-covered, and slowed my car up to the red light at the intersection, just before you cross an old Victorian-era swing bridge, Barton Swing Bridge, which crosses the River Mersey below. As I slowed to the lights, I suddenly became overtaken with an intense feeling of dread and panic. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I broke out in a cold sweat for no reason. I had this feeling like a smackhead or someone was going to jump out of a nearby bush and jump my car. Then, as cliché as it sounds, my car radio suddenly cut out, and the only noise was my idling car engine. The lights turned green, and I suddenly didn't want to go through them, over the darkened swing bridge that loomed ahead of me, almost like it dared me to cross it. I swallowed hard and nervously put my car into gear and crept forward across the junction. The bridge clanked and seemed to groan as I moved hesitantly over it, then followed the curve of the road around a sweeping bend to the left, then to the right, with nothing but tall, dark trees leaning over the road on either side. Around the bend on my driver's side, the right in England, is an old monastery, and through the gates of the monastery I could make out the shape of a dog about to cross the road in front of my car, so I slowed. This dog was huge. It was black. It actually looked muscular from its outline. As I completed the bend, my headlights hit this dog. All I can describe it as, my headlights hit nothing. No reflection of its coat, no details, just like a void. A shadow. This dog turned to me and its eyes glowed yellow. Not reflections like you get off a cat or a fox or whatever. They glowed. This beast then ran across in front of me. It clearly wasn't a dog. It ran in a motion that wasn't a dog. As ridiculous as it sounds, it seemed to run in a jerky motion, like the really bad CGI motions of old Sinbad film sea monsters. I followed this beast till it ran to the side of the road out of my headlight beam, and seemed to completely vanish from sight. I looked in my side windows, side mirrors, rear mirrors, nothing. As my car rolled around the next bend in the road past this monastery, the car radio suddenly blurted back into life, startling me. The feeling of dread lifted, and this thought randomly came to me. You wasn't meant to see that. It wasn't for you. I felt completely normal, but absolutely perplexed by what had just happened to me. I've looked up things that might be this thing I saw. Nothing sounds like it. A thing called the Manchester Shug, which was a headless dog or something, but it doesn't sound like what I witnessed. If anyone has a clue, I'd love to know. It's bugged me for years now. 4. My stance on ghosts and paranormal stuff is... I'm not sure. I used to tell myself there's no such thing to keep myself brave, but it gets hard to refute when I've experienced quite a few of them. My family home is located in a complex, and right next to that is a graveyard. The house itself is not right next to the graveyard wall that separates the human housing from the dead housing. Probably 24 houses away. The house is, well, I don't want to say that it's haunted, but it's haunted. At least that's what I've realized after moving into my own place. Gotta say that I feel blessed that I've only experienced minor things, as I've heard from the security people by the complex gate that the house is right next to the wall had it worst. Evidence being that most maids there never lasted more than 3 months. Having live-in maids is common where I'm from. I don't know about what piss-inducing experience they got, I can only tell mine. Not piss-inducing though, mostly. My room is relatively safe. A few scratches on the door at night. We have no pets. I like to imagine that it must be rats or something. Questionable, but it calms my imagination. I can still brush that off, but one time, middle of the night, I heard knocking on my door. A legit person knuckled to the door knocking. I replied with, "Yes?" thinking that it was my brother. He's knocked on my door a few times before to ask for stuff, but there was no reply. I thought it was odd, so the next morning I asked him, and he told me he did no such thing. That was a bit alarming, but I left it as him pranking me. Nothing much happened. That was until I moved to my brother's room when he went to college. FYI, he has a better room than me. I can honestly say that I only stayed there for a solid week before moving back. Strange things were happening, and I just couldn't handle it. The overall feeling was different too. One time, as I was about to turn off the lights outside of the room, my hand literally on the light switch, the metal sliding door next to my brother's room began to close by itself. A big WTF moment. And safe to say I left the lights on outside that night. That was outside of his room. It must have been a warning. Now inside the room, I had the great idea of sleeping without any light for the first time in forever. Even in my own room, I always have the bedside lamp on since I was a child, but I read somewhere that it wasn't healthy, so new room, new habit. I'll be regretting that decision. I had a pile of textbooks that I stacked on this chair. I was awoken by the sound of them crashing to the ground. I was shocked, but I brushed it off as my bad stacking skills, and gravity caught up with it. Even though it was standing there for 3 days already, The last straw was the creepiest experience yet. That day I just came back from a shopping spree. I left the room messy. There were plastic bags all over the floor. That night I turned off the bedside lamp as usual and got ready for bed. I had my eyes closed. But you know that moment of hypersensitivity before sleeping where you notice everything? I could hear the hum of the AC, and me trying to slow my breathing but got self-conscious about it anyway. I was just having the usual, contemplating all my horrible life decisions, moments replaying in my head when suddenly I heard the crisp rustle of plastic bag. Not just any sound, it was the sound of someone stepping on a plastic bag. Completely different than it just being blown by the wind or something. This was what I tried to convince myself with, but failed. I know that sound since I stepped on a few of them before getting on the bed. It sounded so close, like it was right next to the bed. My heart was beating like crazy, goosebumps on my skin, my whole body was tense. And I kept my eyes shut like my life depended on it. I had this feeling that whoever stepped on that was still there watching me. Back then, it was the scariest thing in my life. Little did I know that there were scarier things in life. Like student loans. Anyways, that happened. Moved out, all was well. I always thought that it was my own overactive imagination. That was until I visited my brother in his dorm a year later. I casually brought it up as he was cooking. I jokingly asked what the fuck was wrong with his old room and he laughed. Then I told him that I moved there for a while and he stopped stirring the pasta sauce. I nervously told him my experience. He put his hands on my shoulders, stared me straight in the eyes, and told me to never sleep with the lights off in his room. At that point I was sweating bullets, not sure if he was joking or serious. Turns out that he experienced weird things in his room as well, but he found that as long as he kept a light on, nothing will come bothering. Well, I guess we kinda bonded over that. We got closer over our shared experience of our childhood haunted home. Pretty neat. 5. Please be aware the following story contains a traffic accident involving the death of a beloved family pet. It's easy to dismiss this as just a weird coincidence. And maybe it is. 8 years ago, my dog and best friend of 14 years passed away. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to pet another dog, let alone bring one into my life for a long time. Then, about 6 years after her death, my aunt rescued an older dog from a shelter. She was abused, and it showed. From the second the dog came home, she attached to me. I couldn't resist, and soon we were best friends. She made me realize all that I'd been missing out on by refusing to open myself up again. We spent the summer barking at cars, attacking the hose, and learning to open up to each other. In a few months' time, I had grown very attached to her, and her to me. One day, while working on my car, she brought me her ball. I told her we would play later and to go lay down. I watched her walk to the edge of the shop and lay down. We lived on a 2-acre piece of land in the country, and our shop and house was located about an acre in from the road. The road wasn't a busy road, and Sunny, my dog, never wandered down that side of the property anyway. In fact, she never left my side. As I worked on my car, I checked on her every few minutes. Shortly after checking on her again, I hear tires screech and a loud thud. I instantly knew what happened. I ran down my driveway, begging God for it not to be her. But as I approached the road, I could see the car stopped and her body thrown 10 feet in front of it. She wasn't moving. I cried and lay down next to her as the world faded around me. Then suddenly, her head lifted. She looked straight into my eyes. Then her head fell back down. She was dead. Eventually, I carried her broken body up to the house and called my wife. When my wife got home a time later, she apologized for missing my calls. But I had not called her until after I had got back to the house. She still had not listened to the calls. She had only seen that I left 2 voicemails. But I never left any voicemail. A few days later, she listened to the voicemails. The first one was right as I approached the car and my dead dog. She said she could hear me running and saying, "No, no, no, no." She could hear the people who hit my dog trying to slow me down, then try to explain what happened. But I just kept saying, "No, no, no." She said it didn't sound like my phone was in my pocket. In fact, she said the audio was the clearest she's ever heard in a voicemail. The last thing she could hear was my cousin running down the driveway, asking me if I'm okay. The second voicemail was only a minute later. She said she could hear a bunch of people talking, 2 family members and 3 bypassers that had stopped at this point, and heard me suddenly gasp. She said everything got quiet for a quick second, and then I yelled out my dog's name. Again, it was crystal clear. Obviously, this was the moment my dog lifted her head and looked at me. Most people I tell this to say that I must have called without realizing it, and that might be true. But no one at the scene saw me with my phone in my hand, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure my phone was in my toolbox by the car the entire time. My wife says the calls were super clear, unlike most butt dials, and from odd perspectives. They did not sound like the phone was in my hand, but rather suspended somewhere within the whole scene. I want to believe that this was something paranormal. Maybe my dog's last message to me. But I don't understand what it means. How does hearing my pain and what I was going through in that moment benefit me or my wife or my dog? My wife can't listen to the voicemails, and I've never heard them. She says it's as if she was there with me when it happened. Like when she listened to them, she was experiencing what I was. Could this be the whole point? Coincidence or not, it is one of the strangest things to ever happen to me, and I'd love to make sense of it either way. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 228. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you liked the video, then please do give it a like, or ask a little ghosties in your house if they'd like to give it a like for you. Leave a comment, and if you want to see more videos like this, or some of the funnier ones I do in other days, hit that subscribe button, gently. You don't want to break anything. Okay, sorry for the lack of streaming on, what day was it, Thursday? I was tired, and I went to bed at 8 o'clock and woke up at 4 in the morning, so there we go. Downside is I'm fairly rested now, but I know I'm going to be tired way earlier than I want to be. There may be streaming, we'll see. It depends how I'm feeling. I've got some bits and bobs coming grocery-wise, so we'll see how I'm feeling after that. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.